Mars looks calm from a distance. A red world, quiet, empty, almost peaceful. From orbit, nothing moves fast, nothing explodes, nothing feels immediately threatening. That calm is exactly why Mars is so dangerous. The planet does not attack you loudly. It does not warn you. It slowly removes the conditions your body needs to stay alive. On Earth, danger usually announces itself. Storms form, temperatures change, systems fail visibly. On Mars, danger is silent and constant, working in the background every second. Many people imagine Mars as simply a colder Earth with less air. That assumption feels reasonable, but it hides most of the real risk. Mars is not dangerous because of one dramatic problem. It is dangerous because many small problems overlap and amplify each other over time. Phil Plait has often explained that space is unforgiving not because it is violent, but because it offers no protection when something goes wrong. Mars has almost no magnetic field. That means the surface is exposed directly to radiation from the sun and from deep space. Radiation does not feel dramatic. You cannot see it or hear it. But over months and years, it damages cells, DNA, and critical biological systems. This kind of danger is easy to underestimate, especially in short missions. The longer humans stay, the more unavoidable it becomes. Mars also has an atmosphere so thin that it barely counts as protection. It cannot trap heat, block radiation, or stabilize conditions the way Earth's atmosphere does. As a result, Mars experiences extreme temperature swings that stress both machines and human habitats continuously. Every structure on Mars must fight the environment just to exist. Walls are not just walls. They are pressure vessels separating life from vacuum. On Earth, a crack is a maintenance issue. On Mars, a crack can become a life-threatening emergency within moments. Mars dust adds another layer of danger. It is fine, abrasive, and electrostatic, meaning it sticks to everything and slowly degrades equipment. Dust storms can last for weeks or even months, reducing solar power and increasing isolation at the worst possible times. None of these dangers exist alone. They interact. Radiation limits exposure time, dust reduces power, thin air removes margin for error. Mars punishes assumptions. Systems that seem reliable on Earth behave differently under constant radiation, cold, and isolation. This is why robotic missions struggle over time, even without human life at stake. Now imagine adding human biology to that equation. Bodies that evolved under Earth's gravity, atmosphere, and magnetic shield. Mars does not meet those biological expectations. It slowly pushes the human body outside its comfort zone and keeps pushing. The danger is not that humans cannot survive on Mars at all. The danger is believing that survival means safety. Mars allows survival only through constant effort, attention, and correction. Any lapse, delay, or miscalculation can compound quickly because there is no natural system to absorb mistakes. This is why Mars is more dangerous than we think. Not because it kills instantly, but because it never stops applying pressure. Understanding this difference is essential before talking about missions, bases, or long-term presence. Mars is not waiting for us. It is testing us from the moment we arrive. And the longer we stay, the more honest that test becomes. Radiation is one of the strangest dangers on Mars because it does not feel dangerous at all. You can stand still, feel normal, and yet your body is slowly being changed in ways you cannot sense. On Earth, radiation feels distant and rare. It belongs to accidents or special places. On Mars, radiation becomes part of the environment, like cold or dust, always present in the background. What protects us on Earth is not just the atmosphere, but the magnetic field. It bends charged particles away before they reach the surface or our bodies. Mars lost most of that magnetic shield billions of years ago. When it weakened, the planet became exposed to space itself, and that exposure never stopped. This loss did not destroy Mars instantly. It worked slowly, over immense time, removing atmosphere, drying the surface, and leaving the planet unprotected. That slow change is important. It shows that planetary danger does not always arrive as a disaster. Sometimes it arrives as a quiet process. Today, Mars is constantly hit by particles from the sun and deep space. Nothing blocks them in a meaningful way near the surface. Radiation is dangerous because it works through accumulation. One hit means little. Thousands of hits over years begin to change how cells behave. This increases long-term risks like cancer, immune problems, and damage to how the body repairs itself after stress or injury. Short missions can tolerate some exposure. Long missions cannot escape the math. Time becomes the most serious threat. Many people imagine thick walls or underground bases as a full solution. Shielding helps, but it never removes radiation completely. Every layer of protection adds mass, cost, and engineering difficulty. Reducing one risk often increases another somewhere else. Even astronauts on the International Space Station receive more radiation than people on Earth, and they are still close to home. Mars is far worse because there is no magnetic field to soften the environment or absorb incoming particles. Radiation also affects machines. Over time, it damages electronics, memory systems, and sensors without obvious warning signs. A system may still work, but less reliably. Small errors become more frequent, and trust in data slowly erodes. This kind of failure is dangerous because it does not announce itself clearly. Problems appear subtly, often too late. Radiation also interacts with other stresses. Low gravity, isolation, sleep disruption, and stress all reduce the body's ability to recover. On Mars, these factors exist together. That combination has never been tested on humans for long periods. This is why radiation is not just a medical issue. It shapes how missions are planned and how people behave every day. It limits how long astronauts can stay outside, how far they can travel, and how habitats must be arranged. Radiation quietly controls Mars life from the background, even when no one is talking about it. Mars does not need explosions or monsters to be dangerous. It only needs time, exposure, and silence. And on Mars, silence is everywhere. Mars dust looks harmless in photos. It appears soft, fine, almost like sand. That impression is misleading, and it hides one of the most underestimated dangers on the planet. Unlike Earth dust, Martian dust is extremely fine and sharp. It was shaped by billions of years without water, leaving edges that grind rather than smooth. This dust sticks to everything. It clings to suits, tools, habitats, and machines, slowly working its way into places it was never meant to reach. On Earth, rain washes dust away. Wind redistributes it. Mars has no such cleaning system, so dust only accumulates over time. One of the first lessons from Mars robots was how quickly dust reduces performance. Solar panels slowly lose power as layers build up. Several missions ended not because of dramatic failure, but because dust quietly starved them of energy. For humans, this creates constant pressure. Every surface must be cleaned, every seal must be protected, every joint becomes a potential weak point. Dust also behaves electrically. It can hold static charge, making it even harder to remove and more likely to cling to sensitive components. This increases wear on moving parts. Hinges, valves, and filters degrade faster than expected, even when designs are carefully tested on Earth. Dust storms on Mars can grow massive, sometimes covering the entire planet. They do not tear structures apart, but they reduce visibility and power for weeks. During these storms, isolation increases. Communication becomes harder. Energy margins shrink. Stress rises quietly inside habitats. The danger is not the storm itself, but the extended strain it places on systems already operating near their limits. Mars dust also poses health risks. Fine particles can enter habitats and irritate lungs, eyes, and skin if not carefully controlled. Long-term exposure to abrasive dust has unknown effects on human health in low-gravity environments. Cleaning becomes a daily survival task, not housekeeping. Ignoring it even briefly allows problems to compound. This creates a lifestyle where maintenance never truly ends. Mars does not allow neglect, even for a short time. Dust turns ordinary movement into risk. Every trip outside brings contamination back inside unless procedures are followed perfectly. Over time, these small routines define life more than exploration or discovery. Mars is often imagined as empty and clean. In reality, it is invasive, slowly pushing its way into every system. Dust does not attack loudly. It wears things down patiently, day after day. That patience makes it one of Mars's most effective threats. Mars does not need dramatic dangers to be lethal. Sometimes, dirt is enough. Low gravity is one of the most deceptive dangers on Mars because it feels comfortable at first. Moving is easier, lifting requires less effort, and the body feels lighter and less strained. That feeling tricks the brain. It creates the illusion that Mars is gentle, even friendly, when in reality the body is slowly adapting in ways that are not reversible. Humans evolved under Earth's gravity. Every bone, muscle, and organ developed with constant downward force shaping how it works and repairs itself. Mars provides only about 1/3 of that force. It is not weightlessness, but it is far below what the human body expects over long periods. At first, the body responds by conserving energy. Muscles weaken because they are no longer fully needed for movement and posture. Bones begin to lose density as well. Without constant load, the body recycles minerals away from skeletal structures. This process is slow and mostly painless. There is no clear warning sign when damage begins. Astronauts on the International Space Station already experience bone and muscle loss, despite exercising for hours each day. Mars adds another layer of uncertainty. The gravity is low, but not zero, and scientists do not yet know how the body responds over decades. Some systems may partially adapt. Others may degrade in unexpected ways. One major concern is the cardiovascular system. The heart does not need to work as hard in low gravity, and over time, it can weaken. This becomes dangerous during emergencies or when returning to higher gravity environments. Balance and coordination also change. The inner ear relies on gravity cues that Mars does not fully provide. This can affect movement, reaction time, and spatial awareness, especially in stressful situations. Vision is another surprising area. Long-term spaceflight has been linked to pressure changes in the head that affect eyesight. Some astronauts return with lasting vision problems, and Mars may not fully prevent that effect. Phil Plait has often pointed out that biology does not negotiate with engineering. The body responds to physics, whether we want it to or not. Low gravity also affects healing. Wounds may heal differently, and the immune system may respond less effectively over time. Small injuries that are manageable on Earth could become more serious on Mars. The biggest unknown is time. Weeks are manageable. Months are difficult. Years remain largely untested. Mars missions imagine long stays, but the body may quietly accumulate damage that only becomes obvious later. This creates a hidden countdown, not a fixed deadline, but a growing risk curve. The danger is not sudden collapse. It is slow degradation that narrows options over time. Exercise helps, but it is not a perfect solution. It slows losses, but does not fully stop them. Artificial gravity has been proposed, but rotating habitats introduce new engineering and medical challenges. No large-scale artificial gravity system has ever been tested with humans for long durations. Until that happens, low gravity remains an unsolved problem rather than a solved inconvenience. Mars forces humans to live inside an experiment they cannot fully control. Every day lived there teaches the body something new, not all of it helpful. Low gravity does not kill quickly, it reshapes quietly. That quiet reshaping is what makes it dangerous. Mars changes people slowly enough that they may not notice until the change matters. And by then, the environment offers very few ways to reverse it. Isolation on Mars is dangerous because it does not feel extreme at first. The habitat is safe, communication exists, and daily routines provide structure, creating the illusion that isolation is manageable. Over time, that illusion fades. Mars removes the small social signals people rely on every day, such as crowds, strangers, and spontaneous human contact. On Earth, isolation is usually temporary. People know they can leave, change environments, or seek new connections. On Mars, isolation has no easy exit. Communication delay deepens this effect. Conversations with Earth are not real-time, turning emotional exchange into something slower and less supportive. This delay changes how people process stress. You cannot talk through a problem instantly or receive immediate reassurance when something feels wrong. Phil Plait has often noted that spaceflight stress comes from persistence, not intensity. Problems repeat instead of resolving quickly. Mars amplifies that repetition. Small annoyances, misunderstandings, or frustrations linger longer because there are fewer ways to release tension. Confined environments force people to interact with the same small group every day, without the ability to step away or reset socially. Over months, this can reshape personality. People may become more withdrawn, more rigid, or more sensitive to minor conflicts. Psychological studies from Antarctic stations show similar effects, and Mars would intensify them through distance and risk. Sleep is also affected. Artificial lighting, altered day length, and stress disrupt natural sleep cycles, reducing emotional resilience. Fatigue builds quietly. When rest quality drops, patience shrinks, decision-making suffers, and emotional reactions become sharper. Mars offers no natural relief. There is no outdoor space, no fresh air, no changing scenery to reset the mind. Virtual environments can help, but they do not replace the brain's response to real, unpredictable surroundings. Over time, monotony becomes its own stressor. Days blur together, making it harder to mark progress or feel a sense of movement. This affects motivation. Tasks feel endless rather than purposeful, especially when survival depends on constant repetition. Mars missions rely heavily on discipline. That discipline keeps people alive, but it can also feel emotionally draining. The mind struggles when every action feels necessary, but rarely rewarding in an obvious way. Social roles become rigid. People are valued for function rather than expression, which can quietly erode identity. On Earth, identity evolves through choice. On Mars, choice is limited by survival requirements. Psychological strain does not appear as panic. It appears as slow disengagement, reduced empathy, and emotional flattening. These changes are dangerous because they affect teamwork, trust, and communication inside fragile systems. A single breakdown in cooperation can threaten everyone, not emotionally, but operationally. This is why mental health on Mars is not a private issue. It becomes a shared survival concern. Mars demands constant emotional regulation under conditions that naturally wear that ability down. The danger is not losing control suddenly. It is losing connection gradually. Mars does not attack the mind. It isolates it until cracks begin to form. And once those cracks appear, the environment offers very few ways to heal them. One of the most dangerous aspects of Mars is how it treats mistakes. On Earth, many small errors are absorbed by the environment or corrected before they escalate into serious problems. Mars offers no such forgiveness. Small mistakes do not disappear there. They wait, combine with other issues, and eventually surface at the worst possible moment. A loose seal, a delayed repair, or a misread sensor might seem manageable at first. On Mars, these small issues quietly reduce safety margins day after day. Because systems operate near their limits, there is very little room for error. Redundancy helps, but redundancy itself adds complexity that must also be managed. Phil Plait has often pointed out that space accidents rarely come from one dramatic failure. They come from chains of small, ordinary problems. Mars amplifies that pattern. Distance prevents quick fixes, isolation limits outside help, and time turns minor flaws into serious threats. On Earth, if something breaks, specialists can arrive quickly. On Mars, the crew must solve problems with what they already have. This forces constant decision-making under pressure. Fix something now with limited tools, or wait and risk it getting worse later. Waiting is often dangerous, but acting too quickly can also create new problems. Mars turns judgment itself into a critical skill. Errors also become harder to detect. Systems may continue to function while slowly degrading, giving a false sense of security. A sensor might drift slightly out of calibration. A filter may clog just enough to reduce efficiency without triggering alarms. These subtle changes are dangerous because they hide until combined with stress, dust, or unexpected conditions. Human error is also unavoidable. Fatigue, stress, and monotony increase the chance of mistakes, even in well-trained crews. On Earth, people recover from bad days. On Mars, a bad day can leave lasting consequences. Procedures exist to reduce error, but procedures also add workload and mental strain, especially over long missions. Following rules perfectly every day is exhausting, yet breaking them even once can be dangerous. Mars does not care why a mistake happened. It responds only to the outcome. This creates a culture where caution dominates every action. That caution keeps people alive, but it also slows everything down. Progress becomes deliberate and careful, not fast or experimental. Even innovation must be conservative, because untested ideas carry unacceptable risk. Mars rewards consistency more than creativity, reliability more than speed. This changes how humans behave. People become more risk-averse, more methodical, and more focused on prevention. Mistakes on Mars are not lessons you walk away from easily. They shape future behavior through memory and consequence. Over time, this creates psychological pressure. The awareness that every action matters never fully fades. Mars turns ordinary human error into an ever-present danger. Not because humans are careless, but because the environment offers no safety net. And that absence of a safety net is what makes Mars truly unforgiving. Power on Mars is not just a utility. It is the boundary between a controlled environment and immediate danger. Without energy, nothing else matters, no matter how advanced the habitat looks. Air circulation, heating, water recycling, communication, medical equipment, and navigation then all depend on uninterrupted power. When energy falters, multiple systems fail together. On Earth, power outages are inconvenient. On Mars, they are existential. There is no outside environment that can buy time while systems restart. Most Mars plans rely heavily on solar energy. But Mars receives less sunlight than Earth, and dust constantly interferes with collection and storage. Dust storms can reduce solar output for weeks, sometimes months, creating long periods of energy scarcity at the worst possible times. Battery storage helps, but batteries degrade over time and add mass. Every added backup system increases maintenance and failure points. Nuclear power offers stability, but it introduces new risks. Reactors require shielding, careful management, and long-term responsibility. A power system that works perfectly for years can still fail unexpectedly due to radiation damage, dust intrusion, or gradual wear. Phil Plait has often emphasized that space systems fail quietly before they fail completely, making early detection critical but difficult. Power loss rarely arrives as a total shutdown. It usually appears as instability, reduced margins, and small interruptions that stress everything else. These fluctuations force constant prioritization. Which systems stay active, which are reduced, and which are shut down temporarily. Those decisions carry weight. Turning off non-essential systems may preserve life support, but it increases psychological stress and operational risk. Energy scarcity also limits exploration. Vehicles travel less, science slows down, and crews become more confined to habitats. This confinement feeds back into mental health, increasing fatigue and frustration during already stressful periods. Power systems also shape schedules. Activities must align with energy availability, reducing flexibility and increasing pressure to perform on time. Repairs are dangerous. Fixing power infrastructure often requires external work in harsh conditions, increasing exposure to radiation and dust. Every repair cycle shortens system lifespan slightly, creating a long-term decline that must be anticipated and managed. Mars does not offer spare capacity. Systems are sized carefully, leaving little room for unexpected demand or prolonged failure. This creates a constant background tension. Energy must always be monitored, balanced, and protected. Even small miscalculations can cascade quickly, especially when combined with dust storms or equipment degradation. Power defines how safe a habitat feels. Stable energy creates confidence. Instability creates constant alertness. Over time, living under that alertness becomes exhausting, even if no major failure ever occurs. Mars forces humans to respect energy as a survival resource, not a convenience. The planet turns electricity into a daily lifeline rather than an invisible background service. Understanding this changes how missions are designed, how crews behave, and how risks are managed. Mars is dangerous not because it lacks power, but because it makes power fragile. And fragility, when combined with distance and time, is one of the hardest challenges humans face there. Water on Mars is often described as a solved problem because recycling systems already work in space. That confidence is dangerous because recycling works best in short missions, not over years of constant use. On Earth, water systems are supported by rivers, rainfall, and vast natural buffers. When something goes wrong, there is time to respond before survival is threatened. On Mars, water exists only inside machines. Every drop must be captured, filtered, stored, and reused without interruption, day after day, without external backup. Life support systems sound efficient on paper, but efficiency removes margin. When systems are optimized, they become less forgiving of failure. A small leak, contamination, or sensor error may not cause immediate danger, but it slowly reduces trust in the system that keeps everyone alive. Over time, filters degrade, seals wear down, and microorganisms behave in unexpected ways inside closed loops. Phil Plait has often pointed out that closed systems behave differently from open ones, especially over long timescales. Water recycling depends on chemistry, biology, and mechanical reliability working together. When one part drifts, the whole loop becomes unstable. On Earth, contamination can be diluted or flushed away. On Mars, contamination circulates back through the system repeatedly. This creates uncertainty. Crews must constantly test water quality, monitor changes, and decide when to intervene. Intervention itself carries risk. Replacing components requires spare parts, tools, and time, all of which are limited. If water production slows, rationing begins. Rationing increases stress, affects hygiene, and raises the risk of illness. Illness on Mars is more dangerous than on Earth because medical options are limited and evacuation is impossible. Water systems also interact with food production. Plants depend on stable water supply, and fluctuations can destroy weeks or months of growth. When food systems fail, pressure on stored supplies increases, narrowing margins even further. This interconnectedness makes water more than a resource. It becomes a central point of failure that influences everything else. Psychologically, water scarcity changes behavior. People become more cautious, more tense, and less willing to take risks. Small comforts disappear first. Showers shorten, cleaning becomes minimal, and personal space feels more confined. Over long periods, these changes affect morale and social dynamics inside habitats. Mars teaches that recycling is not freedom. It is dependence on systems that must never stop working. The more efficient a system becomes, the less tolerant it is of unexpected conditions. Dust, radiation, and vibration all interact with life support hardware in ways that are difficult to predict from Earth. This makes long-term reliability one of the hardest challenges. Not because solutions are unknown, but because perfection is required. Mars does not forgive gradual decline. Systems must be actively maintained before problems become visible. That constant vigilance consumes time and mental energy, adding to the overall strain of living there. Water on Mars is not just something you drink, it is something you constantly worry about. That worry never fully disappears, even when systems appear stable. Mars turns basic human needs into ongoing technical challenges. And when basic needs feel uncertain, everything else becomes harder. Power on Mars is not just a utility. It is the boundary between a controlled environment and immediate danger. Without energy, nothing else matters, no matter how advanced the habitat looks. Air circulation, heating, water recycling, communication, medical equipment, and navigation all depend on uninterrupted power. When energy falters, multiple systems fail together. On Earth, power outages are inconvenient. On Mars, they are existential. There is no outside environment that can buy time while systems restart. Most Mars plans rely heavily on solar energy, but Mars receives less sunlight than Earth, and dust constantly interferes with collection and storage. Dust storms can reduce solar output for weeks, sometimes months, creating long periods of energy scarcity at the worst possible times. Battery storage helps, but batteries degrade over time and add mass. Every added backup system increases maintenance and failure points. Nuclear power offers stability, but it introduces new risks. Reactors require shielding, careful management, and long-term responsibility. A power system that works perfectly for years can still fail unexpectedly due to radiation damage, dust intrusion, or gradual wear. Phil Plait has often emphasized that space systems fail quietly before they fail completely, making early detection critical but difficult. Power loss rarely arrives as a total shutdown. It usually appears as instability, reduced margins, and small interruptions that stress everything else. These fluctuations force constant prioritization. Which systems stay active, which are reduced, and which are shut down temporarily. Those decisions carry weight. Turning off non-essential systems may preserve life support, but it increases psychological stress and operational risk. Energy scarcity also limits exploration. Vehicles travel less, science slows down, and crews become more confined to habitats. This confinement feeds back into mental health, increasing fatigue and frustration during already stressful periods. Power systems also shape schedules. Activities must align with energy availability, reducing flexibility and increasing pressure to perform on time. Repairs are dangerous. Fixing power infrastructure often requires external work in harsh conditions, increasing exposure to radiation and dust. Every repair cycle shortens system lifespan slightly, creating a long-term decline that must be anticipated and managed. Mars does not offer spare capacity. Systems are sized carefully, leaving little room for unexpected demand or prolonged failure. This creates a constant background tension. Energy must always be monitored, balanced, and protected. Even small miscalculations can cascade quickly, especially when combined with dust storms or equipment degradation. Power defines how safe a habitat feels. Stable energy creates confidence. Instability creates constant alertness. Over time, living under that alertness becomes exhausting, even if no major failure ever occurs. Mars forces humans to respect energy as a survival resource, not a convenience. The planet turns electricity into a daily lifeline rather than an invisible background service. Understanding this changes how missions are designed, how crews behave, and how risks are managed. Mars is dangerous not because it lacks power, but because it makes power fragile. And fragility, when combined with distance and time, is one of the hardest challenges humans face there. Returning to Earth is often imagined as the safe ending of a Mars mission, but the reality is more complicated. The longer humans stay on Mars, the harder and riskier the return becomes, both physically and psychologically. The human body adapts to its environment, even when that environment is hostile. After long exposure to low gravity, radiation, and isolation, Earth stops being familiar in important ways. Muscles, bones, and the cardiovascular system slowly adjust to Mars conditions. When gravity suddenly increases again, the body struggles to respond as it once did. Astronauts returning from space already experience dizziness, weakness, and coordination problems. Mars missions would amplify these effects due to longer duration and deeper adaptation. Phil Plait has often pointed out that spaceflight is not a pause in biology. It is a change, and changes have consequences that cannot be instantly reversed. Re-entry itself is dangerous. High speeds, intense heat, and mechanical stress push vehicles and crews to their limits after months or years of exposure to degradation. Systems that performed well on Mars may behave differently during return. Where that seemed manageable can suddenly matter during the most critical phase. Psychological return is also underestimated. Earth is loud, crowded, and overwhelming after long isolation in controlled environments. People returning from long missions often report sensory overload, anxiety, and difficulty adjusting to constant human presence. Time delay communication on Mars forces autonomy. Returning crews must readjust to real-time interaction, authority structures, and constant input. This shift can be disorienting. Decision-making habits formed under isolation may clash with Earth-based expectations. There is also a sense of loss. Mars missions give strong purpose and structure. Returning removes that clarity suddenly. On Earth, survival is no longer the daily focus. That change can create emotional emptiness rather than relief. Medical recovery takes time. Bone density, muscle strength, and balance may never fully return to pre-mission levels. Long-term radiation exposure increases health monitoring needs for the rest of a person's life. This makes Mars missions not just temporary journeys, but permanent biological events. Families and societies often expect a clean return. In reality, returning astronauts may carry invisible changes that persist quietly. The longer the mission, the greater these effects become. Time spent away compounds risk rather than leveling off. This creates a difficult trade-off. Staying longer increases scientific return, but it also increases long-term cost to human health. Mars quietly pushes missions toward a point of diminishing returns, where added time brings more risk than benefit. The idea of coming home safely becomes conditional, not guaranteed. Mars does not release its influence easily. It follows people back. Returning is not a reset. It is another phase of the mission, with its own dangers and adjustments. This is why Mars missions are never truly over when the spacecraft lands. The planet leaves marks that cannot be erased by atmosphere or gravity alone. Understanding this reframes exploration. Mars is not a trip you take. It is an experience that changes you permanently. And the longer you stay, the deeper those changes run. One of the most dangerous aspects of Mars is not any single threat, but how all threats interact over time. Problems on Mars rarely stay isolated. They combine, amplify, and slowly push systems beyond their safe limits. A small issue with power affects temperature control. Temperature changes affect water systems. Water stress affects food production. Each link pulls on the next until pressure builds everywhere at once. On Earth, complex systems are buffered by redundancy and scale. Nature absorbs mistakes quietly. On Mars, systems are compact, artificial, and tightly coupled, leaving almost no room for error. This means that failures are rarely sudden. They emerge gradually, hidden behind routines that still appear normal. By the time alarms sound, options are already limited. Phil Plait has often explained that space accidents are usually not caused by dramatic events, but by ordinary conditions lining up in the wrong order. Mars creates the perfect environment for that alignment. Radiation weakens materials, dust reduces efficiency, low gravity alters biology, and isolation slows response time. Each factor alone might be manageable. Together, they create a system that is constantly drifting toward instability, unless actively corrected. Humans are part of that system. Fatigue affects judgment. Stress affects communication. Minor misunderstandings affect coordination during critical moments. On Earth, social tension can be escaped. On Mars, it remains inside the habitat, influencing decisions and reactions in subtle but important ways. Time makes everything harder. Equipment ages. Procedures become habits. Attention drifts just enough for small problems to go unnoticed. Mars rewards vigilance, but vigilance itself is exhausting. Maintaining constant awareness over years is a psychological challenge, not just a technical one. Automation helps, but automation also creates dependence. When automated systems behave unexpectedly, humans must step in quickly and correctly. That handoff between machine and human is one of the most fragile points in any complex system, especially under stress. Mars offers no external support when systems interact badly. There is no rescue, no quick replacement, no environment that buys extra time. Every decision must account for multiple downstream effects. Fixing one issue may worsen another, forcing constant trade-offs. This turns life on Mars into continuous system management rather than exploration or discovery. The danger is not one catastrophic failure. It is many small corrections arriving too late. Mars teaches that complexity itself can be a threat when margins are thin and time is limited. Even well-designed systems drift toward failure without constant adjustment. This is why confidence is dangerous on Mars. Feeling safe often means problems are already forming quietly. Stability on Mars is not a state. It is an ongoing process that never truly finishes. The planet does not test individual systems. It tests how well everything works together over time. Mars missions are often imagined as journeys with a clear beginning and end. But the longer humans stay, the more that idea breaks down. At some point, leaving Mars becomes more dangerous than staying. This moment is not dramatic and has no clear date. It emerges gradually as bodies adapt, systems age, and return risks quietly increase with time spent away from Earth. The human body changes under low gravity, radiation, and isolation. Returning to Earth after long exposure is not simply a trip home, but a biological shock. Muscles weaken, bones lose density, and the cardiovascular system adapts to lower demands. Reversing those changes takes time, and some effects may never fully reverse. Vehicles face similar issues. A spacecraft that has been exposed to radiation, dust, and temperature extremes for years is no longer in ideal condition. Components degrade slowly. Materials become brittle. Small weaknesses that were once acceptable can become critical during launch or atmospheric re-entry. Phil Plait has often explained that spaceflight risk accumulates rather than resets. Time adds danger instead of canceling it out. As missions extend, the return window becomes a narrow target rather than a flexible option. Delays increase risk rather than buying safety. Psychology plays a role as well. After long isolation, Mars crews develop routines and mental structures tuned to their environment. The idea of leaving becomes disruptive. Earth feels distant, unfamiliar, and overwhelming compared to the controlled world of a habitat. This creates a paradox. The longer people stay, the harder it becomes to safely go back, even though Earth is objectively safer. Mission planners must decide when return is optimal. Too early and objectives are incomplete. Too late and risks may outweigh benefits. This decision cannot be solved with optimism. It depends on biology, engineering limits, and psychological readiness aligning at the same time. Mars does not offer a natural reset point. There is no moment when everything is ideal for departure. Instead, crews operate within a shrinking margin where every delay increases exposure and wear. This is why Mars missions are defined by timing more than distance. The window for safe return matters as much as the journey itself. At some point, staying feels stable while leaving feels risky, even if logic suggests otherwise. That moment is subtle and dangerous because it encourages hesitation rather than decisive action. Mars quietly pushes missions toward commitment, even when they were designed to be temporary. This does not mean crews become trapped forever, but it does mean options narrow over time. Understanding this dynamic is critical for realistic planning, especially for long-duration missions. Mars is dangerous not just because of where it is, but because of how time changes the meaning of choices. The planet turns simple decisions into irreversible ones if delayed long enough. And once that threshold is crossed, Mars stops feeling like a destination and starts feeling like an obligation. One of the most dangerous phases of any Mars mission would not be the beginning, but the period after things start going well. Early success creates confidence, and confidence quietly changes behavior in ways that Mars does not tolerate. Systems feel stable, routines work, and the environment seems predictable enough to relax attention just slightly. That is exactly when risk begins to grow. Mars punishes confidence because it rewards vigilance, not comfort. When crews believe they understand the environment, they are more likely to stretch schedules, delay maintenance, or accept small anomalies as normal. On Earth, this often works. On Mars, it creates hidden debt that must be paid later, usually under worse conditions. Phil Plait has often explained that many space failures happen after long periods of apparent success. Systems do not fail because they were badly designed, but because people stopped expecting them to fail. Mars magnifies this pattern because there is no external buffer to absorb the consequences of optimism. Early missions might run smoothly for months or even years. Power stays stable, life support performs well, and dust remains manageable. This creates the impression that the hardest problems are solved. In reality, systems are aging, radiation is accumulating, and margins are shrinking quietly in the background. Confidence also affects planning. When things work, expansion feels reasonable. Crews spend more time outside, push equipment harder, and take on more complex tasks. Each step forward increases exposure, wear, and dependency on systems that are already under strain. This phase is dangerous because failures are delayed. A choice made today may not cause a problem for weeks or months, making it harder to connect cause and effect. By the time trouble appears, the original decision is forgotten, and options for correction are limited. Mars does not respond immediately to mistakes. It responds eventually. That delay encourages repetition of risky behavior until multiple factors align. When they do, failure feels sudden, even though it has been forming for a long time. Psychologically, success reduces fear. Fear keeps people careful. Without it, procedures feel excessive, warnings feel conservative, and shortcuts feel justified. Mars treats shortcuts as future emergencies waiting to happen. History shows that humans are poor at maintaining maximum caution without immediate threat. Mars exploits that weakness by remaining quiet while conditions degrade slowly. The planet waits until attention drops before applying pressure. This is why the most dangerous moment on Mars may arrive after survival feels routine. The environment has not changed, but human perception has. Confidence replaces vigilance, and that shift is difficult to reverse once established. Mars does not punish ambition directly. It punishes the belief that ambition has already won. When success feels permanent, Mars reminds crews that nothing there is stable without effort. Understanding this phase is critical for long-term missions. Safety depends not just on engineering, but on sustaining respect for risk long after fear fades. Mars teaches that danger does not always come from chaos. Sometimes it comes from things working exactly as expected, for just long enough to lower defenses. And when defenses fall, Mars does not need to act quickly. Time finishes the work. Mars is dangerous because it removes second chances. On Earth, many problems can be revisited later, corrected with time, or softened by circumstance. On Mars, delay itself becomes a risk factor. When something is postponed, it rarely stays neutral. It changes conditions, increases exposure, and narrows options quietly. The planet turns time into a pressure that never stops pushing, even when nothing dramatic appears to be happening. This lack of second chances affects every decision. A repair delayed to save energy today may cost far more tomorrow. A minor anomaly ignored during a busy week can grow into a system-wide issue months later. Mars does not forgive procrastination because there is no surrounding environment to absorb uncertainty. Every unresolved issue remains inside the habitat, aging alongside people and machines. The danger is subtle because delays often feel reasonable. Crews are tired, schedules are tight, and systems still appear functional. On Earth, this logic works often enough to become habit. On Mars, habit becomes liability. The environment rewards early action and punishes hesitation, even when hesitation seems practical or efficient in the moment. Phil Plait has often emphasized that space turns ordinary management problems into survival challenges. What feels like routine prioritization on Earth becomes existential triage on Mars. Choosing what to fix first is not just about efficiency, but about preventing future combinations of failure that cannot be undone later. Second chances also disappear psychologically. Confidence that problems can be handled later reduces urgency. That reduced urgency changes behavior subtly, lowering vigilance and encouraging risk acceptance. Mars exploits this shift by staying quiet while margins erode. When consequences finally appear, they arrive all at once, making recovery difficult or impossible. Time delays also affect learning. On Earth, feedback is fast. You make a mistake and see results quickly. On Mars, feedback can take weeks or months. This delay makes it harder to connect cause and effect, weakening intuition and increasing the chance of repeating errors unknowingly. Systems age while people wait. Radiation weakens materials. Dust accumulates. Seals degrade. None of these processes pause while decisions are debated. Mars continues applying pressure regardless of human schedules or priorities. Waiting does not freeze the situation. It changes it. This creates a mindset where prevention becomes more important than reaction. Fixing something before it fails is safer than responding after alarms sound. Mars teaches this lesson repeatedly, because reacting late often means reacting under worse conditions with fewer resources. Over long missions, the absence of second chances reshapes behavior. Crews become cautious, not because they fear sudden disaster, but because they understand how quietly opportunity disappears. Mars does not announce deadlines. It lets them pass unnoticed. The planet's greatest danger is not a single mistake, but the belief that mistakes can be corrected later. On Mars, later is rarely kinder than now. Understanding this changes how missions are designed, how people are trained, and how success is defined. Mars rewards those who act early, plan conservatively, and treat time itself as a limited resource. And once that lesson is learned, it becomes difficult to forget, because Mars teaches it the same way every time. Living on Mars would slowly change how people decide what matters. When survival depends on shared systems, values shift away from personal preference toward collective stability. Choices that feel normal on Earth, privacy, comfort, spontaneity, lose priority when every action affects air, water, and power for everyone else. Over time, this pressure reshapes how people think about responsibility, fairness, and risk. Ethical decisions become practical decisions. Who gets limited resources during a shortage? Which task is postponed when energy drops? On Mars, these are not abstract debates. They are daily questions with immediate consequences. The environment forces clarity by removing excess options, leaving only outcomes that keep systems stable or push them closer to failure. Phil Plait has often noted that space strips away illusions about control. Mars takes that further by turning values into operational rules. Cooperation stops being a moral ideal and becomes a survival requirement. Individual freedom narrows not by law, but by physics and necessity. This pressure also changes ambition. Success is no longer measured by growth or expansion, but by continuity. A year without major incidents feels like an achievement. Progress looks like maintenance done well rather than bold new projects. That shift can feel disappointing at first, then quietly satisfying as stability becomes its own reward. Mars also challenges honesty. Admitting problems early becomes essential because hiding issues delays fixes and increases risk for everyone. Transparency stops being a social virtue and becomes a technical one. Small truths shared early prevent large consequences later, reinforcing a culture where speaking up matters more than saving face. Over long periods, these conditions shape identity. People begin to see themselves less as explorers and more as caretakers of fragile systems. Pride comes from keeping things running rather than pushing boundaries. Mars teaches that endurance, patience, and restraint are not weaknesses, but advanced skills. This change is uncomfortable because it runs against many cultural stories about progress. Yet it creates a different kind of strength, one built on reliability rather than speed. Mars does not erase human values. It filters them, keeping only those that support life under constant pressure. The planet becomes a quiet teacher, not through disasters, but through daily decisions that reward cooperation and punish neglect. Over time, those lessons sink deep, altering how people think even after they leave. Mars is dangerous, not only because it threatens bodies and machines, but because it forces humanity to confront what it truly values when comfort disappears. And that confrontation may be one of the most profound challenges Mars presents. One of the most unsettling dangers of Mars is how much we still do not know about it. After decades of missions, images, and data, the planet feels familiar. Yet many of its most important behaviors remain uncertain. That uncertainty matters because Mars does not give clear warnings when assumptions are wrong. It allows confidence to grow around incomplete knowledge, and then quietly exposes the gaps at the worst possible moment. Much of what we know about Mars comes from short robotic missions and brief snapshots in time. Rovers operate in limited regions, under specific conditions, and for relatively short lifespans. Humans, however, would experience Mars continuously, across seasons, dust cycles, radiation changes, and long-term environmental shifts that machines have only hinted at so far. Phil Plait has often emphasized that uncertainty in space is not just a lack of information, but a source of risk. When systems are designed around assumptions, unknown factors become stress multipliers. Mars contains many of these unknowns, especially in how its environment changes subtly rather than dramatically. We still do not fully understand how Martian dust behaves over years inside sealed habitats, how radiation interacts with long-term human biology, or how materials age under constant exposure to cold, vibration, and charged particles. Each unknown alone might seem manageable. Together, they create uncertainty that cannot be engineered away completely. Mars also hides its history beneath its surface. Evidence of past water, chemical processes, and geological change exists, but it is incomplete. That incomplete record makes prediction difficult. A planet that changed so much before may still behave in ways we do not anticipate, especially under new human-made conditions. Uncertainty affects decision-making. When outcomes are unclear, choices become conservative, slowing progress and increasing mental strain. Alternatively, uncertainty can be ignored, leading to overconfidence. Mars punishes both extremes, rewarding careful adaptation while exposing rigid planning. Even scientific discoveries can introduce risk. New findings may reveal previously unknown hazards that require immediate changes to procedures or infrastructure. On Earth, adapting is often gradual. On Mars, adaptation must be fast, precise, and correct the first time. This makes Mars dangerous, not because it is mysterious in a dramatic sense, but because it remains partially unknowable, despite our best efforts. Humans prefer clear rules and predictable systems. Mars offers neither consistently. The planet forces people to live with uncertainty as a constant companion, not the exciting uncertainty of discovery, but the quiet uncertainty of long-term exposure and delayed consequences. That kind of uncertainty wears on both planning and psychology. It challenges confidence, patience, and trust in systems that appear stable, but may hide slow changes. Mars reminds us that knowledge is never complete, and that acting with incomplete understanding is one of the hardest things humans ever do. And on Mars, that difficulty becomes a daily reality rather than an abstract idea. Over time on Mars, the line between surviving and living would begin to blur. Daily life would revolve around maintaining systems rather than pursuing experiences. Air, water, power, food, and structure would demand attention before anything else. When existence depends on constant upkeep, living becomes a technical process rather than a natural state. And that shift quietly changes how people experience time and purpose. On Earth, life continues even when we stop paying attention. We sleep, rest, and recover while the environment supports us automatically. On Mars, nothing supports life without intervention. Every hour requires awareness that systems are working, that margins remain intact, and that nothing essential has slipped unnoticed toward failure. Phil Plait has often explained that space replaces comfort with responsibility. Mars takes that idea further by making responsibility continuous. There is no true downtime. Even rest exists inside a controlled bubble that must be actively preserved by machines and people. This changes motivation. Goals become short-term and practical rather than long-term and aspirational. Finishing maintenance, completing checks, and keeping systems stable feel more important than distant achievements. Progress becomes invisible, defined by problems that did not happen rather than successes that can be celebrated. Over long periods, this affects emotional engagement. When every day looks similar and every task feels necessary, it becomes harder to feel momentum. Time flattens. Weeks pass without clear markers, and the future feels like an extension of maintenance rather than something new approaching. Mars does not remove meaning, but it reshapes it. Meaning comes from reliability, consistency, and restraint. Those are difficult values to sustain psychologically without variation or relief. The mind struggles when survival depends on repetition without visible reward. This is where Mars becomes dangerous in a subtle way. Not through sudden crisis, but through erosion of enthusiasm and identity. People begin to define themselves by function rather than curiosity, by duty rather than exploration. The environment encourages this shift by offering no natural contrast. No weather changes, no seasons felt directly, no spontaneous events that break routine. Everything happens on schedule or not at all. Living becomes a series of checklists. That structure keeps people alive, but it also narrows emotional range. Without careful effort, life risks becoming a continuous obligation rather than an experience. Mars teaches that survival can be achieved without fulfillment. But fulfillment requires more than survival. That distinction matters when imagining long-term presence. The danger is not that people cannot endure this state. Humans are adaptable. The danger is forgetting that endurance alone is not the same as living. And on Mars, that reminder is easy to lose in the hum of machines that never stop. Mars becomes especially dangerous when it starts to feel familiar. Familiarity creates shortcuts in thinking. People compare routines, landscapes, and schedules to Earth and assume risks are similar. That assumption is false. Mars only looks calm because it removes visible threats. The real danger lies in treating an artificial environment as if it were naturally stable, when in reality it survives only through constant correction. Humans are excellent at adapting, but adaptation can hide risk. Once daily checks become routine, alarms rare, and systems reliable, attention shifts elsewhere. The habitat begins to feel like a place rather than a machine. On Earth, that shift is harmless. On Mars, it lowers vigilance and increases tolerance for small anomalies that should never be ignored. Phil Plait has often warned that space punishes assumptions carried over from Earth. Mars amplifies this problem because it visually resembles a world, not a vacuum. Red ground, hills, and horizons trigger instincts shaped for Earth, even though none of the underlying support systems exist. This false familiarity affects planning. Crews may schedule longer excursions, delay maintenance, or accept minor discomforts as normal. Each choice feels reasonable in isolation. Together, they reshape risk exposure slowly, until margins shrink without anyone noticing a single bad decision. Mars also creates misleading comparisons with deserts, polar regions, or remote research stations on Earth. Those places are harsh, but they still exist within a planetary system that supports life automatically. Mars does not. Every similarity hides a difference that matters when things go wrong. The danger grows when newcomers arrive. Early settlers may rely on procedures developed during calmer periods, assuming stability continues. Mars has a way of changing conditions subtly, then revealing that assumptions were tied to a temporary balance. This is why training and reminders matter even after years of success. Habits must be questioned regularly, not because people forget how to do things, but because they forget why those things matter. Mars teaches that comfort is not safety. Feeling at home does not mean the environment is forgiving. It only means systems have not failed yet. When Mars feels ordinary, it is at its most dangerous. Familiarity invites neglect, and neglect has consequences that cannot be absorbed by the planet. Understanding this requires resisting instinct. Mars must always be treated as hostile, even when it seems quiet and predictable. The planet does not change its nature. Only human perception does. And perception, when unchallenged, can be the most dangerous variable of all. Mars is dangerous because it offers no true backup. Redundancy sounds reassuring on paper, but on Mars, backups share the same environment, the same risks, and often the same failure modes. When conditions degrade, primary and secondary systems are stressed together, reducing the safety margin far faster than planners expect. On Earth, backups are protected by distance and diversity. Different suppliers, locations, and infrastructures absorb shocks independently. On Mars, redundancy is local and tightly coupled. Dust storms, radiation spikes, or power instability affect everything at once, including the systems meant to save you when something goes wrong. Phil Plait has often emphasized that redundancy without independence is fragile. Mars demonstrates this clearly. Two systems built the same way fail the same way. Even different designs depend on the same energy, the same maintenance capacity, and the same limited crew attention. Spare parts create another illusion of safety. Parts age while waiting. Materials degrade under radiation. A spare that looked reliable during launch may behave unpredictably years later. When a replacement finally matters, it may not perform as expected, turning a backup into another uncertainty. Human redundancy is limited too. Small crews mean overlapping roles, but fatigue, stress, and illness can affect multiple people simultaneously. When everyone is tired at once, decision quality drops across the board, weakening the very layer meant to catch mistakes. Redundancy also increases complexity. More systems mean more interfaces, more checks, and more maintenance. Each added layer requires time and attention that must come from the same finite human capacity, creating trade-offs that are easy to underestimate. Mars teaches that backups are not a shield against risk. They are tools that require conditions to remain favorable. When conditions shift, redundancy erodes instead of saving the day. The danger is believing that having a second system guarantees safety. On Mars, safety comes from simplicity, vigilance, and understanding how shared stresses defeat shared protections. True resilience on Mars is not about how many backups exist. It is about how quickly people can recognize drift and act before backups are needed. And that window is always narrower than it looks. When all these dangers are considered together, Mars begins to look less like a destination and more like a test. Not a test of technology alone, but of discipline, patience, and honesty. Each individual risk may seem manageable, but Mars never presents them one at a time. It presents them layered, persistent, and indifferent to human expectations. This is what makes the planet far more dangerous than we usually imagine when we talk about bases, timelines, or future colonies. What makes Mars especially deceptive is that none of these dangers feel dramatic on their own. Radiation is invisible. Low gravity feels comfortable. Isolation is quiet. Systems degrade slowly. Power fades gradually. Food shortages build over weeks. Mars does not shock the system, it wears it down. That slow pressure encourages confidence to grow before reality reasserts itself. People begin to believe they understand Mars just before Mars reminds them that understanding is not the same as control. Phil Plait has often emphasized that space is dangerous precisely because it allows no margin for human storytelling. Optimism does not reinforce structures. Belief does not stop radiation. Familiar routines do not create atmosphere. Mars strips away narrative comfort and replaces it with physics that never negotiates. This forces a level of honesty that few environments demand for such long periods. The real danger of Mars is not that humans cannot survive there. It is that survival creates the illusion of mastery. Each successful month lowers fear slightly. Each solved problem feels permanent, even when it is only postponed. Over time, missions risk drifting from caution into assumption, from respect into routine. Mars waits patiently for that drift, because time always works in its favor, not ours. This is why Mars should not be approached as a place to conquer or tame. It is a place to engage with carefully, temporarily, and with constant awareness of limits. The planet does not reward ambition alone. It rewards restraint, humility, and the ability to accept that some environments will never belong to us in the way Earth does. Understanding this does not weaken the case for exploration. It strengthens it. It clarifies what Mars truly offers. Not a new home, but a clearer view of how fragile life really is when stripped of planetary support. That lesson matters not just for Mars, but for every decision humanity makes beyond Earth. And it leads directly to the final question that remains unanswered. Mars is more dangerous than we think, not because it is hostile in a dramatic way, but because it exposes how dependent human life truly is on the right conditions. Strip away atmosphere, gravity, distance, and natural balance, and survival becomes a constant task rather than a background state. Mars does not threaten us with violence. It challenges us with permanence. It asks whether we can remain careful, disciplined, and honest not for days or months, but for years without relief. This realization changes the meaning of exploration. Mars is not a destination waiting to be claimed, and it is not a backup plan for Earth. It is a place that reveals how narrow the window for complex life really is. Every system on Mars must fight to maintain conditions that Earth provides freely. That difference matters more than any technological breakthrough because it cannot be engineered away completely. Understanding Mars properly does not reduce its importance. It increases it. Mars becomes valuable not as a future home, but as a mirror. By studying why Mars is dangerous, we learn why Earth is rare, resilient, and worth protecting. Mars shows us what happens when planetary support fades, and how quickly survival turns into maintenance when balance is lost. In the end, Mars is not a warning meant to stop exploration. It is a lesson meant to sharpen it. Exploration grounded in realism lasts longer than exploration driven by optimism alone. Mars reminds us that progress is not about going farther at any cost, but about understanding limits before they are crossed. Mars does not ask whether we are brave enough to reach it. It asks whether we are wise enough to understand what it is telling us. And that question matters far beyond Mars itself.